This is Yair Davidiy speaking to you from the land of Israel. On the 5th of August 2020 will fall the Hebrew day, according to the Hebrew calendar, the 15th of Av, 5780. This day is called Tu B'Av. Tu B'Av means the 15th of Av. Tu represents the letters in the Hebrew alphabet that together give us the number 15. So this is the 15th day of Av. And this day is something of a festival day. Av, on the whole, is a sad month. The 9th of Av, when we mourned over the destruction of the first and second temples and of numerous other calamities that befell the Jewish people. And there were other things as well. And I said to say is on the 15th day we have our rest. We have a type of celebration. It's not a full-fledged feast day, but it's a day of happiness, a minor celebration. This is the 15th of Av, and it is considered a good day for matchmaking, family celebrations, and things of that nature. According to tradition, on this day, the tribe of Benjamin was once again allowed to intermarry with the other tribes. What happened was that in the tribe of Benjamin, there was an incident in the township of Gibeah where a woman, an Israelite woman, was raped and murdered. The tribe of Benjamin refused to surrender the culprits. They refused to give them over to be punished, and therefore the other tribes fought a war against Benjamin. And they beat Benjamin, and they had sworn when they went to war with Benjamin that none of them would give any of their daughters to anybody from the tribe of Benjamin to marry with. And it happened that in the course of the war, most of the tribe of Benjamin was exterminated. Apparently, most of the men, all of the women and children, everyone was dead. Now, the rest of the Israelite tribes, they had a problem. They didn't want to see a whole tribe out of the 12 tribes of Israel. They didn't want to see a whole tribe disappear. It could not be done. It's something that should not be done and should not be allowed to happen. So they looked around and they found wives for a small portion of the warriors, but for most of them they could not do so. So therefore they came up with a solution that on the 15th of Av, it was the customary in the city of Shiloh, the center of Shiloh, in the territory of Ephraim, for the young girls, the unmarried girls, to go out in the valley of Shiloh and to dance in the vineyards. And so after taking counsel, the other tribes, they decided that the unmarried men of Benjamin should be allowed to go out and each one grab himself a woman, grab himself a girl, and marry her. And they would placate the families of these women. They would persuade them not to get angry, not to protest, because this was needed for the sake of all of Israel, in order that there should remain representatives of all of the tribes of Israel. And this is what happened. And they did, and they went out and they took the girls, and they married the girls. And after that, following this incident, it was allowed for Benjamin to intermarry with other members of Israelite tribes, with women from other of the tribes. And not only that, up until then, it had been customary, a very strong custom that only the tribes should only intermarry within each other. That each tribe should only allow marriages within the tribe itself. There had been exceptions, had been numerous exceptions. We find them in the book of Chronicles, we find them elsewhere. But on the whole, this was a general rule, a strong practice, that a person should only marry someone from his own tribe. After the incident of Shiloh and grabbing the girls, it was allowed henceforth for a Hebrew person to take a wife from any of the other tribes wherein he would find someone suitable for himself. This event at Shiloh happened in Tu B'Av, on the 15th of Av, and ever since then, the 15th of Av has been a day of celebration every year. And in addition to that, another event occurred on the 15th of Av, when King Hoshea, son of Elah, allowed members of the 10 tribes to come up to Jerusalem. What had happened, originally we had 12 tribes. 12 tribes of Israel united together in one kingdom under King Saul. After King Saul came King David. After David came King Solomon. After Solomon came Rehoboam. In the time of Rehoboam, the northern 10 tribes rebelled against Rehoboam, and they set up their own kingdom in the north, headed by King Jeroboam ben Nebat from the tribe of Ephraim. And so Jeroboam had become king of Israel, which was rebelling against the southern kingdom of Judah. Incidentally, the present-day Jews are descended mainly from the inhabitants of the former kingdom of Judah. That is where we get the name Jew from. And so we have Jeroboam heading the northern kingdom and Rehoboam heading the southern kingdom. Jeroboam was afraid that if the Israelites, his subjects, continued to go up to Jerusalem, they would want to reunite with the southern kingdom, and he would be out of a job. He would lose his position. According to the Bible, we find in the Bible that every Israelite male at that time was obligated to go up to Jerusalem 3 times a year on the feasts of Pesach, Sukkot, and Shavuot. And they would go up to Jerusalem. And this was a strong custom. And Jeroboam was afraid that if they continue this custom, if they continue to practice this custom, then they would eventually want to be reconciled with Rehoboam, with the southern kingdom of Judah, and they would reunite with Judah, and he would no longer be able to be king of the northern kingdom of Israel. So therefore he set up 2 golden calves, one in the north, one in Dan, and the other in Bethel. And he said, for henceforth, you will all go to either one of these golden calves to worship, and you will not go up any further to Jerusalem. And apparently he also sent barriers on the pathways, on the waysides, to prevent Israelites who wanted to go up to Jerusalem from doing so. And these barriers continued in existence all throughout the history of the northern kingdom, king after king after king, about 200 years or more, and until King Hoshea or Hoshea ben Allah from the northern kingdom, he abolished them. But he was the last king of Israel, and shortly after that, he and the rest of his subjects were taken into captivity to Assyria. But nevertheless, a gesture had been made. This could be called an attempt at reconciliation had been made, and it was a good thing in itself, in its own right. The gesture itself was worth something. And this gesture was made on the 15th of Ab, so due to both these reasons, both to the reconciliation of Benjamin and the removal of the barriers to going up to Jerusalem, this day has also been associated with the union of the Israelite tribes. We, Brit-Am, the movement of the 10 tribes, we also work towards the reconciliation of Israelites and of Judah. And that is what we do. We do research, and we publish results of our research, and we exhort Israelites to examine the Bible, to examine their past, to learn this subject, and to realize that the lost 10 tribes and Judah are one and the same. They belong to the same family, and the Almighty God of Israel wants them to ultimately reunite with each other. They don't have to do that now. They don't have to do it tomorrow. They should take steps in that direction. They should begin to take an interest in the subject, to learn about it, to help spread the message, and to become aware that they have a common ancestry. And this must be known, and this is what the Almighty wants us to do and wants us to know about. And this is a good thing in itself. And Brit-Am should be assisted in doing this. We need help. We need money. We do this full time, and we do it because it has to be done. And we get by through donations and selling publications. And upon occasion, we have to ask for money, and we receive it, and the Almighty helps us. And this is the way we manage through making appeals and through publicising what we are doing. And those who believe in us, help us. And we hope you too will help us and believe in us, because we are in need of this, and it is for the good of all of us. It is good for the good of all of Israel. Just to go back through some of the sources, just to deepen the message a little bit, we'll now read out what happened in the case of Jeroboam. You remember that Jeroboam had become the head of Israel. We had King Solomon, we had Rehoboam. And in the time of Rehoboam, the 10 tribes rebelled. They declared their independence. They set up their own kingdom in the north, the kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes of Israel. And Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, was at the head of them. And it had been the custom for Israelites to go up 3 times a year to Jerusalem on the feast days. So we are told in 1 Kings 12, verses 26 onwards, and Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom may return to the house of David, that is Rehoboam. He didn't want them to reunite with the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of his people will turn back to their Lord Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and go back to Rehoboam, king of Judah. Therefore the king asked advice and made 2 calves of gold and said to the people, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up from the land, one in Bethel and the other he put in Dan. Now this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan. He made shrines on the high places and made priests from every class of people who were not of the sons of Levi. And he apparently also posted guard points, barriers, armed barriers on the roadways to prevent Israelites from going up to Jerusalem, until Hosea ben Allah, the last king of Israel, removed them. King Hosea ben Allah, he was the last king of Israel. A few years after he began to reign in the north, Hezekiah became king in the kingdom of Judah. King Hezekiah also attempted to make a reunification with the 10 tribes, with the tribes in the north. And it came to pass, that we read in 2 Kings 18, verse 18, it came to pass in the 3rd year of Hosea, the son of Allah, king of Israel, that Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah, and he did what was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father had done. And King Hezekiah, as soon as he began to reign, he purified the temple, he reinstituted the temple service. This is described in detail in 2 Chronicles chapter 29. And he had begun to reign in the 3rd year of the reign of Hosea in Israel, in the northern kingdom. And Hezekiah attempted to reconcile the remnants of the 10 tribes who still remained in the land of Israel when Hosea became king of the northern land of Israel. Most of the Israelites had already been taken into exile by the Assyrians. The Assyrians came down, apparently at first they conquered the Israelite tribes east of the Jordan, the tribes of Reuben, Gad and half Manasseh, and they took them all the way into captivity, exiled them. Then they came down and they conquered some years later the northern section of Israel, the northern Galilee, Naphtali, Asher, all that area, and also took them too into exile. And they also took a portion of Manasseh, and then later they came down and they took the rest of the Israelites who remained in Samaria. And the last section of the Israelites to be exiled were those over whom Hosea became king. Hosea had actually become king over a truncated portion of the Israelite nation, a small portion of it. And he was the last king of Israel, and those he ruled over were the last to go, the last to be exiled, as if to say. And it was this last remnant to whom Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent messages. He sent messages, and it says in 2 Chronicles chapter 30, verses 1 onwards, and Hezekiah sent to all Israel and Judah, and also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh, that they should come to the house of the Lord at Jerusalem to keep the Passover to the Lord God of Israel. For the king and his leaders and all the assembly in Jerusalem had agreed to keep the Passover in the 2nd month. But they could not keep it at the regular time because a sufficient number of priests had not consecrated themselves. And nor had the people gathered together at Jerusalem, no matter the priest, the king, and all the assembly. So they resolved to make a proclamation throughout all Israel, from Beersheba to Dan, that they should come to keep the Passover to the Lord God of Israel at Jerusalem, since they had not done it for a long time, in the prescribed manner. Then the runners, the messengers, went throughout all Israel and Judah with letters from the king and his leaders, and spoke according to the command of the king. Children of Israel, return to the Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. Then he will return to the remnant of you who have escaped from the hand of the kings of Assyria. And do not be like your fathers and your brethren who trespassed against the Lord of God of their fathers, so that he gave them up to desolation, as you see. Now do not be stiff-necked as your fathers were, but yield yourselves to the Lord and enter his sanctuary, which is sanctified forever, and serve the Lord your God, that the fierceness of his wrath may turn away from you. For if you return to the Lord, your brethren and your children will be treated with compassion by those who lead them captive, so that they may come back to this land. The Lord your God is gracious and merciful, and not turn his face from you if you return to him. You see how he is speaking? In effect, he is telling them that they are the last to remain. Most of them had already been taken away into exile by the Assyrians, and he's telling them if they return to God Almighty, if they repent, then not only will it be good for them, but also their brothers who are captive in Assyria, God will also help them. And he is pleading with them to remember this, and to look around and see how desolate, how this destruction that had already visited most of the kingdom, and that in order to avoid this continuing, they should repent and return to the God of Israel, whose sanctuary was in Jerusalem. That is what Hezekiah is telling them. So it says in verse 10 onwards, so the runners passed from city to city through the country of Ephraim and Manasseh as far as Zebulun. But they laughed at him, they laughed at him and mocked them. Nevertheless, despite that, some from Asher, Manasseh and Zebulun humbled themselves and came to Jerusalem. Also the hand of God was on Judah to give them singleness of heart to obey the command of the king and the leaders and the word of the Lord. So then he goes on and he continues, and in verse 26 he tells us that it was great joy in Jerusalem, for since the time of Solomon the son of David, king of Israel, there had been nothing like this in Jerusalem. Then the priests and Levites arose and blessed the people, and their voice was heard, and their prayer came up to his holy dwelling place to heaven. So this is what happened, that is what happened. And here we hear that Hezekiah celebrated the Passover with all Israel and with Ephraim and Manasseh, and that also the pilgrims from the tribes of Asher, Manasseh, Ephraim and Zebulun and Issachar had come up to Jerusalem, and there have been quite a few of them, even though most of them apparently had mocked, had laughed at the emissaries of the messengers, and had not come, and thought he was being ridiculous, and did not want to worship God Almighty in Jerusalem. But some of them had come. And this event took place in the first year of the king of Hezekiah, or shortly afterwards, and it was in the 3rd year of King Hosea, or shortly afterwards, and the final exile of Samaria occurred about 6 years later. Hezekiah had become king after most of the 10 tribes had already been exiled by Assyria. Some remained. They were ruled over by King Hosea, son of Allah. In the first year of his reign, King Hezekiah attempted to reconcile the 10 tribes, as we have read. He had some limited success, but most of the Israelites rejected his overtures. And then about 6 years later, all the rest of the inhabitants of the northern Israelite polity of Samaria were also exiled. See 2 Kings 18 verse 10. The remnants of the 10 tribes were all exiled. They would join their brothers who had already gone into exile before them. This fact we saw before, that Hezekiah had been pleading with them who had left from the northern tribes to repent in order that their brothers who were already exiled might return. That's what we read. 2 Chronicles chapter 30 verse 9. If we should return to the Lord, your brethren and your children will be treated with compassion by those who have led them captive. They were already in captivity, so they may come back to this land. For the Lord your God is gracious and merciful, and will not turn his face from you if you return to him. Return to God, and he will help you. He will help us. The 10 tribes on the whole did not repent. The few that remained in the northern time of King Hezekiah ben Allah were also exiled. If we find in 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 9 onwards. Now it came to pass in the 4th year of King Hezekiah, which was in the 7th year of the Hosea the son of Elah, king of Israel, that Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up against Samaria and besieged it. At the end of 3 years they took it. In the 6th year of Hezekiah, that is the 9th year of Hosea, king of Israel, Samaria was taken. Then the king of Israel carried Israel away captive to Assyria and put them in Halak and by the Habor, the river of Gozan, in the cities of the Medes, because they did not obey the voice of the Lord their God, but transgressed his covenant, and all that Moses the servant there of the Lord had commanded, and they would neither hear nor do them. So this is what we have. At all events, the 15th of Ab is a day of reconciliation, of reunion. It is symbolized both by, or exemplified both by the fact that on this day, the tribe of Benjamin was re-accepted, one could say, into the community of Israel, and all of the tribes were permitted to marry with the people from other tribes. And also on this day, King Hosea, the last king of Israel, removed the barriers for his subjects to go up to Jerusalem if they so wanted to do so. And this was a beginning. This was a beginning of reunification, and ever since this day has been commemorated and celebrated as if it is associated with the eventual reunification of the tribes of Israel. We in Brit-Am, we too believe in this. We work for it. We find the lost 10 tribes to be amongst Western peoples, amongst the peoples of Western Europe, and also in the British Isles and Ireland and Northern America, Canada and the USA, also Australia, New Zealand and related areas. That is where the lost 10 tribes are. We don't say that everyone in those areas belongs to those 10 tribes. We do not know what proportion, but it could be a significantly high one. At all events, that is where the lost 10 tribes are, according to biblical and rabbinical sources and other sources. And also, this is confirmed by secular evidence that we have found from archaeology, mythology, linguistics and numerous other sources. And this knowledge needs to be made known, it needs to be internalized, it needs to be spread. More research needs to be done on it to make it clearer, to make it the evidence more cogent, more stronger, to give it more impact. And that's what we do, that's what we work at, that is what we labor at, that is our task. And we too should be assisted in this. May the Lord God of Israel bless you. Thank you.